From the Soapbox is the official podcast for the American Animal Hospital Association's digital newsroom, Trends. Here, we take inspiration from the familiar soap notes, but instead of looking at the condition of a patient, we're diagnosing and discussing the state of the veterinary industry. We'll chat about the challenges, trends, and innovations shaping the veterinary world with voices from across the community. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Singler. Thanks for listening. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of From the Soapbox. My guest today is Dr. Kate Boatright, veterinarian, writer, author, speaker, and mentorship expert. During our conversation, she shared her own mentorship journey and how that shaped her desire to advocate for mentorship for other early career vets. We talked about what she's learned from students and new grads and how some of them are prioritizing mentorship over pay when looking for an associate position. She broke down the importance of setting expectations around mentorship during the interview process and making sure communication styles jive between mentor and mentee. And because it's her special focus, we spent time talking about how to give mentors what they need, whether it's adequate time in their schedule to work with mentees, special training, coaching, or other support. She shared some tips and tricks about how to make the most of the mentoring relationship and how to make it work within the challenges of clinical practice. I hope you'll join us for this episode. Without further ado, getting her time to talk from the soapbox, Dr. Kate Boatright. Dr. Kate Boatright, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you and learn more about one of your special interests and definitely areas of expertise. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be able to join.
So we're going to talk about mentorship. And first, I just kind of wanted to hear more about your story, sort of your origin story, if you will, kind of why you like to talk about mentorship so much, why it's important to you personally, how you decided to make that kind of an area of focus and interest for yourself professionally, and why you like both mentoring and teaching others how to mentor. I'd love to hear more of how you got here.
Yeah, so I graduated from Penn in 2013, and I was in the minority in my class of going straight into practice. And the time I graduated was really when I feel like the mentorship conversation, especially around like formalized mentorship, was really kind of starting to ramp up. There was a lot of conversation about, pros and cons of internships versus going straight into practice. And I entered vet school planning to specialize and go the internship residency route. And then it was a combination of just not wanting to do the rigorous schedule for 4 more years, but also just that I loved so many parts of practice. It was hard for me to like choose where I would want to specialize in. So I ended up deciding to go into general practice. And so I knew I needed that support. I knew I needed mentorship. And I was very fortunate to find an amazing first clinic to work in. It was in Central PA. It was a 5-doctor practice, had phenomenal support from the doctors, from the technicians, the rest of the staff, and couldn't have asked for a better place to start my career. The only downside was that my husband was living 3 hours away because we were not able to find jobs together coming out of grad school. So after a year, I left that practice and moved to Western Pennsylvania, where I still am. And the practice I found, I didn't realize how much mentorship I still needed at a year out until it wasn't there anymore. And that practice became a very toxic environment. I know we throw that word around a lot, but I was coming home, crying every day, and not because of patients and clients, but because of staff interactions, and just feeling very very lost. I didn't feel like I had a lot of support. The staff didn't trust me, and that kind of snowballed into mistrust and miscommunication. And a lot of the things in hindsight that I was missing there, I think could have been fixed and addressed had there been a stronger mentoring relationship. So when I moved into the third practice, where I worked for 5 years in general practice and emergency, that was when I really kind of really found my footing in vet med, and kind of found a place where I felt like I was a part of the team, and that I was really thriving as a doctor. And so when I had the opportunity to mentor a new grad vet when I was about 5 years out of school, I jumped on it, and I just opened up this whole new level of satisfaction for me. I was coming home so excited every day, not only about my cases, but about watching her grow. And it was around that time that, I kind of had that full circle moment of like, okay, this is what mentorship is supposed to be. This is what this is all about. And so I got that, I got that interest area, and I'd always enjoyed it and I'd always been interested in it. But as I started to talk to people, I realized that there were a lot of gaps. We talk about mentorship and we tell practices you need to offer this if you want to bring a new graduate in, but then no one tells practices or mentors how to do this. And, we have some phenomenal resources now to support our new graduates. There's amazing mentorship programs that mentees can enroll in. But where I saw the gap was there really wasn't a lot of support for the mentors themselves. And so that's what I have worked to do over the past few years is develop resources between lecture materials and the manual that I've written and articles on consulting and coaching and just supporting the people who are doing the mentoring. Because if we don't have good mentors, then our new grads aren't going to be able to thrive.
Yeah, so it sounds like your first job, like you got a little taste of it, of what it could be like, and then felt that sort of that huge gap when it was taken away
Mhm.
at your next job and then realized how much you needed it and what a difference it made. I can imagine there are some out there who maybe come out and never have that taste of it and don't even realize how much they would benefit from it, how much they would gain from it. Um,
Or end up in a job like my second job and, are feeling like, okay, what's wrong with me? Why can I
yeah.
not do this? Why can I not build my confidence? And not realizing that it's not you, it's the environment that you're in.
Yeah, and particularly when you're just coming out of school and your confidence is already probably not very, at least for some of us. I know that was the case with me, like not very high. You kind of feel like you have to prove yourself, you can't mess up. You maybe feel self-conscious that you don't know as much as you think that you should, and then to not have any support, I can see how that could very easily translate into feelings of there is something wrong with me. I'm not good enough at this, which is so dangerous for an early career professional who might not have what they need to feel like they wanna keep pushing forward with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we talk a lot in the profession about, retention issues, and, mentorship is one of the things that has been, shown to improve retention. The lack of mentorship is a key factor in turnover for a lot of new grads. And so when we can, not only say we're going to provide it, but actually deliver it, that's where we get that better retention.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you kind of like nowadays, what kind of feedback are you getting from early career veterinary professionals when you talk to them? Do you feel like a lot of them are getting the mentorship they want and of the quality that they want? Like how common is that now that it's kind of been out there and we've been talking about it and focusing on it, are you seeing that that's made a difference?
I do. I think it has. And I think that, I still like I talk to early career vets, or I've talked to some fourth years lately who are trying to decide between a couple of jobs, and they're saying, okay, this is what practice A is offering me and this is what practice B is offering me, and a lot of them say, the most important thing to me is that I have good support and that I have good mentorship. And I mean, the AVMA just released the data from the most recent, senior student survey. And once again, mentorship is number one reason that new grads are choosing a job. I've talked to new grads who have taken jobs for less pay because of the promise of mentorship.
Yeah, so they're ranking the mentorship over the money.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
That's
think the hard part is, you can make mentorship look really good on paper, but it is getting the follow through. And I think it's still a mixed bag. I've talked to, a good number of people who are a couple years out, and some of them are like, yes, I had phenomenal support and I was so lucky that I picked the practice I did. And then I've talked to others who said, yeah, it looked really good on paper and they just didn't follow through. And sometimes it's, things got really busy. Sometimes it's, hey, the staff that we thought we were going to have when you started, now one of the doctors has left. And so that's kind of shifted the dynamics and the time availability. There's a lot of factors that can play into, how mentorship and ultimately is delivered.
Do you think it sometimes I feel like I've heard this before where, there's a promise of mentorship and maybe the practice owner just assumes that all the associates are going to provide that, but there hasn't really been, like, a formal discussion about are they open and interested? Do they feel prepared to do that? Are they gonna have the time allotted for that? Do they need to be somehow compensated for it, particularly if they're gonna maybe miss out on other types of revenue? Like, is that a common problem? Excuse me, where maybe there's kind of an assumption that's not expressly communicated?
Absolutely. And when I have a lecture on like top mentorship mistakes. And for me, that's number one is not identifying who the mentor is going to be before promising mentorship to a new graduate. I think that, there are some cases where, yeah, the medical director or practice owner says, yes, we're going to offer mentorship, but they either already have so much on their plate that they can't really take the time to do it, or they, don't have an interest in it. And, like you said, they assume that an associate or all the associates are going to pick that up. Um, but not everyone has, one, the desire to mentor. There are people like myself who just, we really enjoy teaching and, I will mentor every day, any day when I have the opportunity. And there are other people who say, well, yeah, I mean, I guess I can if I have to. And then there are other people who are like, I'm not a good teacher. I'm not comfortable with people watching me do stuff. I just want to do my own cases and live in my world. And all of those things are fine as long as we communicate that. And I think if you're, so I encourage new grads when they're interviewing to ask, like, who is the mentor? Who's the primary mentor going to be? And I use the term primary mentor because for me, even if you have multiple associates in the practice who are willing to mentor, I think it's good to identify kind of a point person that's going to be, the person working on the mentorship agreement, having the scheduled mentor meetings, giving the kind of funneling the formalized feedback through. Because sometimes I feel like if you have too many mentors, it's a good problem to have when you have tons of associates who want to mentor. But you just want to make sure that they're coordinating their efforts. And so I do think it's good to have that point person. And that's why I term them the primary mentor.
That's a good point, yeah, just having someone who's gonna kind of organize it all, and then, like you said, if there are other people that wanna be involved, great, have sort of spelled out expectations of what they're gonna do, how often, all that kind of thing, and I love
Mhm.
that you brought up the point that it's okay if some people don't feel that that's their strong suit or they don't feel comfortable with it. In fact, it's better, I would think, for them to communicate that and have the space and the freedom to be able to share that so that we're not pairing them with a mentee who has all these expectations that are probably not gonna be met with that person.
Yeah. And I think that's another big part of it is like you mentioned the expectations is like one of the first things I encourage, mentees and practices to do, and ideally this should be done during the interview process before you've even hired them, is let's make sure we have a shared definition of what mentorship looks like. For some new graduates come out and they want a very formalized program. They want to have regular meetings. They want to have, a progressive schedule that gets, longer appointments at first that shorten over time, maybe starting with wellness and working our way to more complex cases. And there are other people who come out and say, "You know what? I feel ready to kind of jump in and I want to have some support, but I don't need it to be so formalized." And so, if you have one of the people in the first category who want that really formal mentorship and they end up at a clinic that says, "Yes, we offer mentorship, but the practice's idea of mentorship is we're here to answer questions when you have them." Like, that's not gonna be a good fit, and you're gonna lose that new grad because even though you think you're delivering mentorship, and you are to some degree, you're not delivering the level of mentorship that they need and want. And so setting those expectations, I think, is critical for us to have those successful mentorship experiences.
I would imagine that comes down a lot to like communication style as well, because if I'm the kind of person who doesn't want to feel like I'm always bugging someone, I may be more hesitant to ask my questions even when I have them because I feel like maybe they're sick of me. They don't want to keep answering my questions versus if I'm in a situation where someone is kind of inviting me to ask questions and setting aside that time and I feel like that's what that's for. Um so just kind of having a matchup of communication styles as well. Is that something that you feel like students need to talk about or early career, even if they're not like just fresh out of school? Like you said, often we do mentorship for years after graduation. How can
Yeah.
they sort of figure out if their communication styles are gonna be a match?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is like, talking to the mentor and especially, like, if I feel like when you interview with a practice, you're usually talking to the medical director or the practice owner, but, like, if they're not gonna be the mentor, then I encourage, students and early career vets to ask and say, "Hey, can I sit down with the person who's gonna be my mentor? Because let's make sure that we have some connection there." And just ask about, "Hey, what's your standard mentorship style? Are you, hey, bring me questions whenever. I don't mind getting interrupted through the day." Or, I have some people who say, like, "Hey, I love mentoring and teaching, but when I'm focused on something, it's hard for me to keep getting my attention drawn away. And so if it's not an urgent question, I'd rather say, hey, let's set aside 15 minutes at the end of the day or over lunch to sit down and go through those non urgent questions." So I think, yeah, like you said, it's the communication style, and then it's just maintaining that open communication, and not just creating stories for ourselves. Like you said, "Oh, they're probably I don't wanna ask a question because they're probably sick of me because I've asked 10 questions already today." When, it may be from their perspective, they're like, "Oh, I'm so glad this mentee is coming to me and asking me questions and wanting to make sure that they've got things right." I am of the mindset I would much rather have a mentee who asks a million questions than one who starts to make assumptions and thinks they know what they're doing. And then I'm having to like head off a wrong path. And so I think it very much is having not only setting the expectations from the beginning and just discussing, hey, from a mentee, how do you learn best? What's your typical learning style? And from the mentor, what's your teaching style? What's your comfort level? Making sure that vibes together, but then having that regular check-in and say, okay, what's working, what's not working, and just not getting so much in our heads and creating stories that may not be true.
I know I definitely create a lot of stories in my head, and I have to imagine I'm not alone in that. I know not
Absolutely
everybody is
not.
in their head all the time, but yeah, I think we tell ourselves so many stories about what we think the other person is doing and how they feel and what their intentions are, and it can get us into trouble, so that's
And we do that with
that's a good
clients too.
reminder. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Um, and that can lead to judgment, it can lead to all kinds of misunderstandings, miscommunications, so definitely something I need to remember, and I'm sure sure others as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, even as someone who talks about that a lot of like, okay, like check in, don't just make the assumptions and things like that. I still do it sometimes. And so
okay.
I mean, I think step 1 is just being aware that that's what you're doing and going, okay, wait, is this reality or is this the story I'm telling myself? And what do I need to do to find out what the truth is?
Yeah, which involves often being vulnerable and maybe asking questions that feel hard to ask, like, "Are you okay with me continuing to come to you? Does this bother you? Is this what you want me to do?" And because you don't know what the answer is gonna be, but hopefully most of the time, the answer won't be as scary or as negative as the story we've told ourselves in our head.
Exactly.
I wanted to talk about sort of what you consider to be included in mentorship. Like, do you consider mentorship to be purely case management? Because I imagine there are a lot of other things that new and early career veterinarians are still trying to figure out, as frankly, I am still, 20 years out, in some cases, but, so we're all continually working on them, but things like, time management, communication, ways to sort of progress in your career, financial management, those kinds of things. Like, do you consider all those to be part of what should be included in mentorship for
I
early
do.
career veterinarians?
I do. I think that, I think that's where sometimes practices get into trouble when they aren't experienced at mentoring is they come at it and say, "Hey, we're going to provide case support. We're going to help you in surgery. We're happy to talk through all of the cases." But then when the mentee comes to them and says, "Hey, I don't know how to talk to this client," or "I'm having trouble delegating to the staff." They're like, "Oh, wait, we have to teach these too." And so I think that, yes, I would say 100% mentorship it's not just case management and technical skills. It is absolutely supporting, those professional developments with communication skills and leadership skills and also just mental health and well-being. Um, there was a survey of recent graduates out of New Zealand that was published a couple of years ago. And one of the things that increased the risk of turnover was was them feeling like the practice owner or their mentor didn't care about their well-being. That they weren't having those conversations. And so I definitely think that that needs to be a part of mentorship. That being said, you know, there's a lot of support that is needed. And if you're asking one single person in the practice to do that, one, you've got to figure out, there's only so much time in the day. What are their responsibilities going to be? Are we going to take away some of maybe their primary case management? Or if they were doing other things in the practice, maybe they were helping run social media or something like that. Like maybe we need to take away some other responsibilities to allow them to have the time to provide mentorship. Um, but then also thinking about the fact that mentorship doesn't have to only happen in the four walls of the clinic. And a mentee doesn't only need to have one mentor. And so, it may be saying, this is what I'm able to provide you in the clinic. Here are some resources where you can get that other support. Or we're partnering with one of the national online mentorship programs, and we're going to pay for you to go through that because we know that that program is going to support a lot of those non-clinical. I don't know if clinical is the right word because we need communication in the clinic, but
Yeah.
like the non-technical stuff, no, they're not going to sit there and walk you through a spay, but they can talk to you about managing your anxiety around surgery. Um, I'll be here in the clinic to, hands on, but, I want you to have more support than that. And so I think that that's something too to consider is just, making sure that it's okay if you aren't able to be everything to one person. I don't think we should expect that of a mentor. I think things work best when we say, hey, these are the things I'm good at teaching. These are the things I'm comfortable teaching and discussing and supporting you with. Here's the things that I don't feel like this is my area of expertise, and so let's find some resources to support you in those.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And certainly, yeah, I agree. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that one person or even, the individuals of one within the walls of the practice, like you said, should should feel responsible for providing every kind of mentorship that a new employee could potentially want or need. Um, and I'm curious because you have a lot of interaction with students, with vet students, through all of your lecturing and your traveling. You travel around to a lot of the vet schools, and I've seen you have a goal of going to every vet school in the US,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
To speak. And I know you've spoken about like parenting. What else do you speak about with students?
Yeah, so I let's see, my most popular lectures lately, the parenting one has been super popular because, it's just, as you know, it's not something that people talk about. And, I also do a lot of spectrum of care lectures, kind of introducing students to that idea. I think I started giving that lecture in 2019, and I'm getting fewer requests from it because I do think it is getting covered a little more by some of the schools, but it's still one that a lot of students really enjoy. I talk about mentorship, I talk about mental health. I kind of have a wide range, but I mostly focus on more of those like softer skills, the communication, problem solving. I'm not going to go into a school and say, hey, this is the medical approach to such and such a condition. I might go and say, here's 6 different medical approaches we can take on a spectrum of care. And here's how we decide and talk to the client to find the right fit. But yeah, for me, I like trying to augment the clinical education by talking to students and talking about the things that I wish someone had talked to me about when I was a student.
Yeah, and that was one thing I wanted to ask about. So you're talking about some of these, like you said, kind of soft skills like mental health, maybe conflict management, this idea of resilience that we see thrown around every so often, that we need to teach either teach people to be more resilient or choose more resilient people so they can handle the rigors of veterinary medicine, which I have a lot of thoughts about. But I'm curious to know, like, do you feel like students are getting more of a foundation in some of these skills, like in their regular veterinary education? Or is it only because people like you are going out and talking about it that they're getting more exposure to that before they graduate?
I think it's a combination. I mean, I do think that a lot of the curriculums have evolved and are continuing to evolve to include more, communication training. I think there is a lot more discussion about mental health. Um, what I what I don't know and don't have a great sense of is whether, like you said, is it actually happening in the classroom in the core curriculum, or is it just that the clubs and the extracurriculars and those, lunch and learns and extra evening lectures and things like that, that the students are realizing how important those are in choosing, participating in organizations like the Veterinary Business Management Association, VBMA, which, is near and dear to my heart. And, and saying, "Hey, I realized I need more than just knowing how to do surgery and treat a diabetic cat. I need more to be ready for practice." And so I think that it's a combination of a shift in the curriculum, and then also just having more resources available, especially with being able to bring people in virtually. I would much rather stand in front of a live audience and talk to the students, and be able to, have one-on-one conversations and go out to dinner. But I am still glad when I can, at least get my face on a screen and be able to, to talk to them. And I think for the students, having people available virtually really, diversifies what exposure they're getting in school.
And so do you feel like when you have these interactions with them, like they're like recognizing all these things that they would benefit from having and sort of seeking it out and looking for it, like they want to have this type of training like while they're still in school and potentially when they get out to practice? Is that like a need or something you're asking for?
Yeah, I think a lot. I mean, I think definitely the students that I interact with are recognizing that. I work very heavily with like I said, the VDMA, and that's an organization that, even though they have business management in the title, it's so much more than that. It is all of those, success skills. And so I think that, they have done a really good job at helping students recognize how important that is. And groups like SAVMA are bringing in and talking about a lot of the major issues in the profession. And so I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of student driven interest. I mean, I think there's also some students who are so bogged down with just getting through vet school that the thought of going to an extra lecture in the evening on communication when they've got an exam tomorrow is like, oh no, I just need to, put my head down and get through. But I do think I think there's a growing recognition of that need for that holistic training and exposure.
I hear that. I mean, there's so much more to learn now than even
Oh,
10, 15, 20 years ago. So
absolutely.
I hand it to the students. They've got so much on their plates, so much they're
Yeah.
trying to deal with.
Yeah, you just think
Um,
about the volume of medical information alone that is continuing to evolve, and vet school is still 4 years. Whether
yeah,
you went to school 30, 40 years ago, or even for me, I graduated coming up on 12 years ago, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, there's so much new stuff that has come out, new drugs and, new treatment modalities and ways to approach cases," and, it's still only 4 years to learn all of that. And so there are some cases, I hand it to the professors of like, how do you choose what information is getting into those courses? Because there's so much of it and you're not going to be able to teach it all.
yeah, that's a good point. I'll be 20 years out this year, and I just threw away a lot of my binders that I've been carrying around from house to house and not looking at. I finally felt like, okay, maybe I don't need to hold on to these for like security reasons anymore. And so much of the information is probably outdated now. So let's recycle it. But
Yeah. Yeah, I think I purged the binders a couple of years ago, but I have a lot digitally that is still on my computer and probably will live there forever,
yeah,
just in
well,
case.
just in case, like you said, you never know. You can never have too much information, right?
As long as you know how to use it.
Exactly, exactly.
AhaCon 2025 is more than just continuing education. It's your chance to take your career to the next level. Earn race approved CE credits, engage with industry leading experts, and gain fresh perspectives to bring back to your practice. Hear from powerhouse speakers, plus enjoy unique experiences like live pet portraits, charm bracelets, professional headshots, resume reviews, and much more. September 11th through 13th in downtown Chicago on the Magnificent Mile. Don't miss this transformative event. Learn more at c.aha.org. That's the letter c.aha.org. Looking for the latest veterinary news? Stay ahead of the curve with stories from the American Animal Hospital Association's digital, award winning newsroom, Trends. We're bringing you fresh stories every day, covering everything from the cutting edge clinical insights to helpful practice management tips. And it's not just articles. Watch videos, check out interactive charts, and learn more about the people shaping our industry. As an AHA member, you also unlock exclusive members only content designed to help you and your team thrive. Visit aha.org/trends today and sign up for Trendsetter, our newsletter where all of our stories are delivered to your inbox twice a week.
Well, I wanted to turn to like talking more about the employer or the mentor side of things, and you've touched on several of these, but I just kind of wanted to kind of bring them all up again, like some of the obstacles that mentors or potential mentors face when they have a new veterinarian who wants or needs mentorship. Like it's not always easy to just be like, okay, I'm going to develop this amazing mentorship plan and execute it and everything will be great. Like, what are some of the obstacles that they face when they're trying to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think time is a big one. Um, just saying like, okay, I tell people like, you need to have regular mentor meetings. You need to block out this time in your schedule and sit down with your mentee and have conversations. And that's really easy to say. It's a lot harder to do. And for me, I think, some of the kind of tips and tricks that I've found is, typically those meetings work best if you do them either first thing in the morning or like right after the lunch hour. Like basically, I think when you try to schedule it at the end of the day, we all know we run behind, that extra emergency we squeeze in and then all of a sudden it's 3:45 and oh, our mentor meeting was supposed to start at 3:30 and I still have 6 things I'm trying to finish. Well, maybe we'll just meet next week. Yeah, I think it's a lot easier for that to happen than if you put that up front at the beginning of the day. You're less likely to be running behind at, 8 or 9 a.m. when you're starting. And I also, especially if you have a multi-doctor practice, like, and you can swing it, like, just get out of the building. Don't try to have a mentor meeting in the clinic, because you're probably gonna get interrupted. So go take a walk, go to a local coffee shop. I worked with a mentor, out on the West Coast, and she and her mentee were, touring all of the local coffee shops. Like, they just picked a new one every week to try. And then they would go into work after. And, it was still they were on the clock during that time. But, it's okay if you say, "Hey, I need to see 2 less appointments so that I can have this mentor meeting." I did the math on it of, if you look at your average client transaction for your mentor and your mentee, and you say, "Hey, we're gonna block out an hour a week," and maybe they're missing 2 or 3 appointments. Well, okay, add that up of what, how, based on their ACT, I think I roughly came up with, maybe that's a few $100s, and okay, that's once a week. And over the course of a year, it adds up to something like 7 or $8,000. And no, that's not small, but then think about the cost of replacing a veterinarian if that individual decides, "Hey, I didn't get good mentorship and I'm gonna leave." Well, you could have, maybe you lost 7 to 8, let's even say $10,000 of revenue this year having mentor meetings when you could have been seeing appointments. But if you have to replace that new veterinarian, you're looking at $100,000 or more of turnover costs. And so, when you look at it like that, I think there absolutely block the time, have the mentor meeting. But I think you have to get that mindset of like, I'm seeing a few less patients today, but in the long run, this is going to benefit the practice and we're going to have better patient care because we took this time to have these meetings.
Not to mention you're gonna have, hopefully, a more fully prepared employee who's gonna be more efficient and more confident and more capable and,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know, provide the
Yeah. And then
ROI there
right.
as
And
well.
the other thing I think about with the time perspective is I think, some people are thinking, "Oh, like, we talked a little bit earlier about like the mentee who just kind of comes with constant questions and wants to double check everything." I was that person. Like I wanted somebody's rubber stamp on all of my plans. And I did have one of my mentors say to me like 99% of this was, a couple years out of school, but she said 99% of the time when you're coming to me with a plan, you have the plan down and you're just looking for that okay. She's like, so, it's sometimes it's how we talk about the cases, with our mentees. And so I, as a mentor, try to train my mentees that if you're going to come to me with a question, that's fine. But you need to have a plan and a specific question, not just come to me and say, "What do I do? How do I treat this?" No, take the time, do the legwork, make a plan, and then we'll talk about it. Some of it is just teaching the mentees how to be more independent. Hey, you can call the specialist at the lab and run this case by them. They may have better suggestions than I do. Or, you've got things like VIN or VetHive. There are resources where you can look this stuff up. And so it's also about teaching the mentees just how to use the resources they have, and triaging those questions. If it's a question of, what antibiotic am I going to send home with this dog? Well, yes, let's talk about that now in the moment because you need to know that before that patient leaves. But if it's a question of, the client is looking for dietary recommendations or they're looking for recommendations on behavior and I'm not sure how to answer this, it's okay to say to a client, hey, I need to look into this further. I will follow up with you in the next few days by email or by phone. And then, I tell my mentees, triage your questions, keep those non urgent questions. And then at the mentor meeting, we sit down and we go through them all. And I think that can also really help with the time factor. If we just, kind of train, as mentors, don't just answer everything. Take the time to have that dialogue. It's going to lead to a lot less frustration and it's going to help make your mentee more independent.
I can remember you bring up such a great point as a younger veterinarian, how freeing it was for me when I finally accepted that it was okay for me to tell a client, I'm going to have to look that up. I'm going to have to do some more research. And that they weren't completely appalled that I didn't know the answer to absolutely everything and that they were appreciative that I was going to take the time to look into it and learn
Mhm.
more and ask someone else. And they were actually okay with that because I think I carried that around for a long time, that kind of shame of not knowing everything and feeling like I was supposed to.
Yeah. And
So I
I
think that's
I
such a
can
good point.
remember yeah, I can remember as a new grad, like, I'd want, I'd want my mentor's opinion on something, but I didn't wanna tell the client that I wanted somebody else to, look at this lump and agree with me. And so a lot of times my go-to line and my techs, knew what this meant is I'd say like, "You know what? I have better light in the treatment area, so I'm gonna just borrow Fluffy and we're gonna go and I'll be back to talk about this more." And then it was pretty much, walk out of the room and go, "Okay, Dr. Crombie, I need help. Like, what is this? I don't know what I'm looking at." And so the techs knew, like, if I was saying I needed better light, it meant they needed to go find my mentor. And half the time, if they had headed out of the room before me, they were finding her and going, "Hey, she wants you to look at this." And but then over time, I realized, you know what? It's okay if I just say, "Hey, I want to have a colleague take a quick peek at this and get an opinion." The vast majority of clients appreciate that, and it doesn't necessarily erode their trust in you. If anything, I think it strengthens it.
Yeah, I think it's always good to have a good, like, get out of the exam room excuse. I think
Yes, yes.
everybody has one, but I love that one. I haven't heard that one before, a better light.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it's fine to, like, have kind of a something you say where you just feel like you need to have a reason to leave the room, whether it's to go look something up, but I think it's also fine to say, "You know what? I'm gonna look that up." If you feel comfortable. Or I used to do all the time, like heart murmurs and stuff like that. I'm gonna get one of the other doctors here to listen. Do you mind if I take blah blah blah? And they'd be like, "Oh yes, thank you so much." I don't know why they love that. Um, that I was gonna get
Especially if
another
you're
opinion.
I think especially if you're coming into a practice as a new grad and, like, it's a solo doctor or only a couple of doctors and the clients have been working with these doctors for years, like, just saying, "Hey, I'm gonna go run this by, the doctor who you know and are super comfortable with." I think, like, sometimes I have clients who really appreciate that and, just saying, like, "Oh, okay," like, they know what they're doing, I trust them, but I really trust their mentor, and so I think sometimes that can help too.
Yeah, I can say having had that experience as a younger vet, though, there were some times where I felt like I needed to set a boundary around that because there were the clients who wanted me to run everything by
Yeah,
Doctor so and so, which there were times where I didn't need a second opinion, where I knew what I was doing, but the client didn't seem to have that trust in me. So
agreed.
those were always awkward, and there were some times where I'd go back to Doctor so and so and be like, "You can have this client back because they basically want you to run the case, and they're not letting me do anything independently."
Yeah,
Um,
and I think as mentors, that's something where we need to maybe we do need to step in and just say, "I trust my mentee to manage this case. I would not be asking you to see someone that I didn't trust with your pet's health." And so if you trust me, I need you to trust them. And so I do think I think a good mentor is able to, walk that fine line of I'm going to support you and I'm going to, help make the client happy, but I am going to at some point say to the client look, they are absolutely doing the right thing. I would do the same thing. You know, don't question everything just because it's not coming from me.
Yeah, that's a really good point because it sometimes seems like there's not a whole lot that the younger vet may be able to do to sort of persuade the client when they
Mhm.
come in with that mindset. So just having a mentor who has kind of the wherewithal to say, "I'm backing this person up. You need to trust them." That's
Mhm.
part of being a client here is you need to trust all the
Who I
veterinarians
hired. Yeah.
that work for me. Yeah, very good point. Um, Okay, so we've talked about some of the obstacles. Like, what are some of the sort of amazing or creative or out of the box ways that you've seen practices that are killing it with mentorship? Um, I know you talked about getting out of the clinic, which I love, going to a coffee shop because undoubtedly you'll be interrupted like every 5 minutes at the clinic. If you're there, even if you have the door closed, there's the I know you're in a meeting, but I know you're on your lunch, but they're
Mhm.
they're gonna come to you. So I love that idea. But what other sort of creative ideas have you seen practices apply to your approach mentorship?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other things that really strengthens a mentorship is when you've got the whole team on board with it. So, I and that for me, that was my first mentorship experience was I was just as comfortable going to the technicians and asking them questions, and getting their opinions as I was, going to my mentor sometimes. I'd be in surgery and, I'd done a lot of my training for surgery in shelters where, yeah, I had to pick what size suture I wanted, but there was one type of suture. And yes, I learned in school all the different types of suture and when to use what, but that was second year, and now I'm 3 years later, and my technician is going, "What suture do you want?" And I'm in the middle of a spay going, I want 2-aught." And they say, "Yes, but what kind?" And I'm like, "I don't know. What does so and so, what does my mentor use? What do the other doctors use?" And my technicians didn't look down on me for that. They understood that it was something new. It was something I was learning. And so I think especially those really experienced technicians, they can be just as good of a mentor to a young veterinarian and technicians. We've talked about mentorship for veterinarians, but a lot of this applies to any member of the team. But so I think that's one thing is just allowing your team to really get involved with mentorship. And maybe saying, you know what, you know, yes, you want to learn these technical skills, go talk to the technicians because they're the ones who are really awesome at doing this.
For sure.
Um, yeah, I mean, the clinic I'm in now has amazing tech utilization, and I hardly ever pick up a syringe to draw blood, or I hardly ever place a catheter. We kind of jokingly on the maybe once a quarter at most when I do because we're short staffed or running behind or something, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can do that. I'm like, okay, that was my blood draw for this year. But as a new grad, I wanted to do some of those things because I didn't, I wanted to be able to do those and keep that skill up. And so, telling the technicians, hey, this is what I want. These are the things I want to learn. If there's an opportunity for me to do them, seek me out. And then the other thing that I think can be really beneficial and again relies on the team cooperation is especially for someone who has an interest in surgery or dentistry of saying, hey, I'm really interested in this procedure. For me, when I started at the clinic where we did emergency, I was really worried about a bloat coming in when I was on ER by myself, because I'd never done that. And so, I knew some of the doctors did prophylactic gastropexies. And so I just said, hey, if somebody has one of those scheduled, if it's possible, can we block me out so that I can go into surgery and watch it? And so, the reception team, had a list up front of these are the things she wants to see. And if they scheduled it, they would check and, hey, Dr. Boatright's free at that time. We're just going to block her appointment so that she can slip over into surgery. So I think kind of knowing what those goals, long-term goals are, and finding ways to support them is really helpful. So I think, the more we get our team involved and the more we have that open communication, the better off those mentorship programs are going to be.
Very good. I love that. Um, and you've done so many things on mentorship throughout your career. Like you have your mentorship manual, which we'll post a link to, and your website. And you wrote a lot of the content for the mentoring toolkit
Yeah.
for AHA, which is an incredible resource. So I'm so happy that that's out in the world now. I'm curious, like, what, if anything, do you think is missing from mentorship as we see it today? Or what do you think would make mentorship easier or better or more widespread or successful, like better in on any of those metrics? Like, what do you think would be helpful that maybe we don't have or we're not doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things, that we're missing, and, spoiler alert, I'm working on figuring out a way to address this, but I think one of the biggest things we're missing is, um again, going back to, like, having the support for mentors, it's not just teaching mentors how to mentor, but just that continued support for them. So, like, when I had worked with a company and done some consulting, and we had monthly group meetings with the mentors, and those were so great to have mentors come and say, "Hey, this is a problem I'm struggling with my mentee. I don't know how to address this," or this was something that happened in the clinic, and I'm not quite sure how to say this. And to have another mentor say, "Hey, I'm dealing with that too. Here's how I've approached it." Or, so I think sometimes it's, that collaboration, I think sometimes is what's missing, that, we have all these mentors in their own clinics and in their own islands. And I think some of the bigger corporate groups, that have the established mentorship program have more ability to have the talk amongst the mentors. But I do think that that's kind of that community is what's missing. Of saying, hey, let's have a space where we can talk and we can share cases. Let's celebrate what our mentees are doing really well, and let's talk about the challenges. I've had, in those group meetings, I had mentors, where we talked about some of the generational differences of saying, when we've all heard it, like, "Oh, when I came out of school, we just worked, 60 hours a week and we didn't complain about it, and now the new grads don't wanna work, because they actually care about work-life balance and they want to have, that's a priority for them." And so it's talking about how, you know, it's some of that is generational differences, so let's talk about it, and let's say, "Okay, how can we have a conversation with our mentee around that in a respectful way?" To say, you know, "I am so glad you're here, and I wanna be respectful of your boundaries, but I also, if the clock hits 5 and you're in the middle of the case, it's not okay to just, drop it or, rush it to wrap it up and walk out the door." Like, how do we have that conversation? And so, trying not to have to solve all of those things solo, or reinvent the wheel all the time, I think is one of the places that we really could improve mentorship by better supporting the mentors.
I love that, and it also seems like it could be a good way, for example, if Doctor A has a mentee who really wants to learn more about orthopedic surgery or, growing their investment account or, um, thinking about going back and doing residency or something like that. And their particular mentor doesn't feel like completely equipped to provide that. If there is some kind of community or sharing of resources, they could be like, hey, here's this course, or here's this individual that I could connect you with who is an investment guru and could talk to you about that. Or this person could help you connect with a surgeon that you could go shadow, or like we were talking about earlier, that one individual, that one practice doesn't have to be the end all be all for every source of mentoring that individual might want or need. Um, So I love that idea that that could kind of, in addition to kind of supporting each other, it could help to sort of connect individuals to different resources.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, well, just to kind of finish off today, I always ask, just what's one thing that you're really excited about in vet med? It could be something that we have going on already, something that you hope or know we're going to have in the future, like just something that you're really excited about.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, that I've seen evolve over the past few years that I'm so excited we have now are those national mentorship programs for, I think it offers so many more resources for new graduates to get even extra support, but it also offers, for the people who love mentoring and maybe they haven't been able to hire a new grad or they're in a clinic that just doesn't need another doctor, but they still want to be a mentor. It provides that opportunity, to engage and use those mentorship skills. So I met Addie, Reinhard, like, before she launched Mentor Vet. It was at the gosh, I think it was 2020, VLC. I was there with my infant son, strapped to me at a networking event, and she's telling me about her idea for a mentorship program, and I'm like, "Wow, that's really cool," and, like, just to kind of, like, watch those things come to fruition, and getting to work with some of the other amazing people in the mentorship landscape, there is a new mentorship textbook that is in the works. I mean, I love my manual, but it is, a small sliver of of what you need. And my manual is really more about like, what's the structure that we need for mentorship programs in the clinic. But Danny Rabwin, who has Ready Vet Go, is the editor, and she's brought tons of experts together to contribute to this textbook that is in the works. I don't know an exact publication date. I know we're all still, scrambling to finish our chapters in the in the upcoming days. But so I think that's another really exciting resource that's going to be out, in the nearish future.
Awesome. You're always writing a book chapter when I talk to you.
I know this is the last textbook chapter, and then I have one more journal article, and then I unless somebody wants to come and ask me to write more, which, I mean, I kinda want a little bit of a break before I dive into another giant project, but yeah, yes, I have been working on lots of textbook chapters this year.
It's because you're doing so many great things. So, well, thanks for spending some time with me and sharing all your insight on mentoring. I'm so excited for all the projects that you're working on and for your book chapter to come out and just to see how mentoring continues to grow because I think we've got so many new veterinarians and technicians. We've been using the word veterinarian, but I should say that I think everything that we've been talking about could apply to any member of the team who has a want or a need for mentorship. So
And any place in their career. It's again, we talked about early career vets, but our mid-career vets need mentorship too, as we move into different life stages and career stages. I think, it is that bottom line that like mentorship is something where we talk about it in the context of early career and veterinarian, but it really it supports the whole team, it supports the whole profession. And I think it's a huge part of creating a sustainable profession and career.
agreed. Well, thanks so much. And I look forward to everyone getting to hear what you have to say.